Hello everyone, I am Mohammad Asim Siddiqui. I am Professor of English at Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. I am going to talk about gender, literature and language. Of all important ideas and theories that have had an impact on the study of literature and language, in the last few decades, the concept of gender has had the most decisive influence. Though the words sex and gender are often used as synonyms in ordinary parlance, the two words have very different connotations. Sex is the product of one's biology, whereas gender has more to do with one's social and cultural notions of identity. More recently, gender is also spoken of in non-binary terms, and words like lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual refer to more complex notion of gender identity. The study of gender entails a study of cultural and political dynamics of sexuality. And as Donald E. Hall, he is an important writer, he puts it, gender theory examines critically the identity politics of sexuality. The identity politics of sexuality, these are key words. The study of gender in literature and language has a synergic relationship. Synergic relationship means they influence each other with feminist studies of literature and language. Both feminism and gender theory have followed a similar trajectory, borrowing from each other at the same time as disagreeing on some important points. Today, we are going to discuss the role of the feminist intervention in the study of English literature and language. It is a vast subject. So, here we are confining ourselves to feminist intervention in the study of English literature and language. Feminism has traditionally been divided into different phases. I think this is a point which we all know. The first phase, lasting from 1830 to 1920, saw battles for the voting rights for women, and I think you have come across this point in different modules. This was the period of the growth of liberal and socialist feminism, which drew upon the political ideologies of liberalism and socialism. And we can say that liberalism is a term in political science and socialism is also a term used in political theory. They have had some impact on literature and language. Now, we can say that liberalism plays its trust in political and legal rights, and it had its most famous champion in John Stuart Mill. And Mill, we know, who wrote The Subjection of Women. It is considered one of the founding texts of liberal feminism. For Marxist theory, on the other hand, a change in economy was necessary for any change in women's position. Economy, that is the key word. The founding text of Marxist feminism was Friedrich Engel's The Origin of Family, Private Property and the State, in which he did not make a separate case for women, but rather believed that the overthrow of capitalism will result in ending the subordination of women. And this point I think needs some elaboration. Marx and Engels, they collaborated and they produced number of works. But as far as the question of women's liberation was concerned, this was left by Marx to Friedrich Engels, and Friedrich Engels talked at length about it. And what is important here is that he is talking about the overthrow of capitalism, and which will also result in the overthrow of patriarchy. So, that means for him patriarchy's demise will result only from the overthrow of capitalism. Now, we come to the second phase, and starting in 1960s from the United States of America, the second wave has seen a continuous flow of feminist writing from diverse positions, continuous flow. Betty Friedan's The Feminist Mystique, that was published in 1963, it articulated the psychological problems of women, the crisis faced by the women, their suffering and a general feeling of frustration were called by her the problem without a name. This is a very interesting term, the problem without a name. Often we have problems, but problems may not have any name, but here it was a problem without a name, and this particular term became very popular. It was a kind of war cry in feminism, second wave feminism. Shulamit Firestone, another important writer, she wrote The Dialectics of Sex, and it was written from a radical feminist position. She blamed women's reproduction and menstruation for their subordination, and she proposed a radical view that technology could come to women's aid to liberate them. Technology. The use of artificial reproduction was her radical solution to end the subordination of women. A very different position is taken by Adrienne Rich, who praises the role of motherhood. So, you see, on the one hand, there is one feminist theorist who is talking about motherhood as a kind of hindrance. On the other hand, another theorist celebrates motherhood. In between, we can say that in between the two waves was the influential work of French writer Simone de Beauvoir, who is The Second Sex, and it was published in 1949. It started the essentialism debate within feminism. She took a position against an essential feminine or masculine nature. Her famous sentence, "One is not born but rather becomes a woman," emphasized the role of culture and society in shaping ideas of the masculine and the feminine. Probably we can just talk a little bit about her contribution, because her work appeared at a kind of midpoint, and because it appeared at a midpoint, so there is this debate whether she belongs to the first wave or she belongs to the second wave. But what we can say, that especially her view that gender is something which is the result of one's not biology, but rather one's upbringing, rather the role of society, culture. That was a very important idea. And another important idea was, do we have women who have a particular nature, or men also have a particular nature? That means, can we reduce men to essences, or can we reduce women to essences? So, this was a very interesting debate, essentialism debate. There has always been a debate within feminism, whether it is equality of women with men or their difference from men, that is more important. Critics often turn to psychology, often to the theories of Freud, to highlight the ideas of difference without necessarily subordinating women to men. The idea of difference also defines the work of many postmodern feminist writers, and here also you must have seen in different modules that postmodern feminism had made a very important contribution. Now, postmodern feminism is identified with the work of many French writers, and often we also read these writers when we talk about third wave of feminism and fourth wave of feminism. But here we are just talking about three important writers. So, here we can say that the work of postmodern feminism was influenced by the work of Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault. And who are those three important names? These three important names are Luce Irigaray, Julia Kristeva, Hélène Cixous. They are especially worthy of note in any discussion of postmodern feminism. Irigaray's idea of écriture féminine, Kristeva's use of Lacanian psychoanalysis, and Cixous' concept of feminine imaginary are a major contribution of French feminism, which is greatly influenced by philosophy and psychoanalysis. An equally important influence on postmodern feminism and on the third wave of feminism is the work of Judith Butler. It is a very important name, who talks about the concept of gender performativity. Gender is not a given, but rather performed by the actions which define one as woman. And what is her solution? Her solution is to subvert those roles and those actions and introduce gender trouble. Her famous book, Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, it is considered key text not only in feminism and gender studies, but also in philosophy. We can now discuss what is meant by literary feminism, because this is one very important subject. Literature was a very important concern of the second wave feminists. The work of many feminist literary critics has fundamentally changed how we read literature today. It has changed our view of the literary canon. The literary canon consists predominantly of white, male, heterosexual writers who present a particular view of the world in their work. In the search for an alternative canon, or in accommodating the work of women writers in the established canon, many women writers have been discovered. The blind spots in the work of many male writers and critics have also been highlighted. Two aspects of literary feminism are especially very important: the role of women as readers and the role of women as writers. Many important feminist critics turn to the work of the male writers to see the representation of women in their works. Since study of images and character was especially a popular method of reading the text, critics looked at the images of women in the works of male writers. To their horror, they discovered that women have generally been represented in a negative manner in a number of canonic works of literature. They appear dependent on men, often simply seen as wives, daughters and sisters, and rarely in their own right. In her famous work Thinking About Women, which was published in 1968, Mary Ellman, who described criticism by male critics as phallic criticism because of its insensitivity to women, she identified some feminine stereotypes which recur in literature. These stereotypes include formlessness, passivity, instability, materiality, spirituality, piety and irrationality. If we think about some famous titles of books like Men are from Mars, Women are from Venus, and some other common associations of men with intelligence and women with emotions, we can understand how common this kind of binary thought process is. Ellman also criticized the sexual analogy whereby the emotional and intellectual nature of women equals their sexual nature. To the problem how women's writing is viewed in phallic criticism, she wittily remarked, there must always be two literatures like two public toilets, one for men and one for women. She was also critical of male critics for treating books written by women as women. That means, written by women as women. Kate Millet's Sexual Politics, this was another very important one, Kate Millet's Sexual Politics. It was published in 1969 and it was a powerful work which blazed a trail. In this work, she took to task canonic writers like D. H. Lawrence, Henry Miller, Norman Mailer and Jean Genet for perpetuating negative images of women and identifying them with passivity, ignorance, docility and ineffectuality. They also have a conception of a masculine and a feminine personality in their works. She highlighted how Lawrence's cult of virility, Miller's hatred of women and Mailer's anxiety in relation to women reveal different aspects of misogyny, that is hatred of women. How should a woman reader react to works which perpetuate patriarchal notions about gender and society? Judith Fetterly's The Resisting Reader, the title is very interesting, The Resisting Reader, the reader who resists, in other words. She asked the woman reader to become, and I quote her words, a resisting reader rather than an accenting reader. The aim of feminist criticism for her is not simply to interpret the world, but to change it by changing the consciousness of those who read. And we can see her use of terminology. She is deeply influenced by Marxist ideas. You remember that Marx's famous line, philosophers have interpreted the world, the need is to change the world. That means, change is one very important concept in Marxist theory, and Marxists believe in bringing about change in society. And here is one feminist theorist who is talking about the fact that change is necessary in the way how we read works of literature. That means, we must change our reading habits, we must change how we approach works of literature, we must change our method of interpretation and we must change how we look at men and women in those literary works, even if those works are written by great writers. Significantly, she described her work, and these words are also very interesting, a self-defense survival manual for the woman reader lost in the masculine wilderness of the American novel, masculine wilderness of the American novel. American feminist writer Elaine Showalter, she is another very powerful writer. She identified two important dimensions of feminist criticism, feminist critique and gynocritics. Representation of women in the work of male writers, which defines the work of critics like Millet, Fetterly and Ellman, is an example of feminist critique. Gynocritics, a more positive enterprise on the contrary, puts focus on the work of the women writers. Gynocritics is concerned with, as Showalter defines in her essay Feminist Criticism in Wilderness, women as writers, the history, styles, themes, genres and structures of writing by women, the psychodynamics of female creativity, the trajectory of the individual or collective female career, and the evolution and laws of a female literary tradition. and this is quoted in one very famous work, Feminist Literary Criticism, which was written by Ruthven. Ellen Moore's famous work, Literary Women, and this work came out in 1977. It dwells on women's writers' interaction with each other, their kinship and a literary tradition of women's writing. Showalter also tried to discover a female literary tradition in English literature, pausing to discuss women's literature in terms of a female subculture. These are interesting words. An entirely different kind of work which talks about female literary tradition and the nature of female creativity is Mad Woman in the Attic by Gilbert and Guber. Faced with a male literary tradition, many women writers like Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, George Eliot and Emily Dickinson were gripped by a feeling of anxiety. Gilbert and Guber explore hidden note of rage, revolt and concealment in women's writing. Inspired by this project, many feminist critics set out to discover lost women writers. There was also a search to discover some traditions of women's writing in different countries and periods. Thus, Suzy Tharu and K. Lalita's influential two-volume work Women Writing in India 600 BC to the present has discovered multiple traditions of women's writing in India. This monumental study cuts across periods, genres and languages. Here we can just think about this particular word, lost writers. Who are lost writers? Lost writers are those writers who somehow do not exist in public consciousness. They are not talked about. That means, these lost writers, there are other terms also, forgotten writers, that means writers who are forgotten, writers who are lost. So, maybe at a particular point of time somebody wanted to write, a woman wanted to write, but she was not given any opportunity. So, that way she could not materialize her talent. So, she is a lost writer. Then somebody wrote, but did not publish, and because she did not publish, her work is also lost. Then somebody wrote and published, but was quickly forgotten, or her work was not accorded any recognition. She is also a lost writer. So, feminist critics just try to see whether we can discover some lost writers, some forgotten writers, and in the process they were able to discover many important works, many important writers who now are being read with lot of interest. Then this question, do we have any literary tradition of women writing? And here this question was also tackled by many critics, and they discovered that contrary to popular opinion, women actually wrote, they also published, and in the process we see number of women writers. And so, the scene today in 2018 is very different what it was maybe in 1950. Now, there is another very important subject which is taken up by feminist writers, and that is the issue of language. So, here we can see that gender and language, this is one very vast area, and we can ask some questions. Do men and women use language differently, or does the question of power determine different uses of language? These and many other aspects of the relationship of gender and language are taken up by a branch of study known as sociolinguistics. There are some commonly held beliefs about how men and women use English language, which are often based on stereotypes, prejudices and unexamined beliefs. In the early 18th century, English satirist Jonathan Swift talked about the masculine and feminine characteristics of language, where the masculine was identified with hard consonant sounds and feminine with soft vowel sounds. Otto Jesperson's 1922 book Language, Its Nature, Development and Origin devotes a whole chapter on the language used by women. Jesperson identifies women with soft speech and politeness. He believes that women have a limited vocabulary and they tend to use diminutives in their speech. Diminutives means short forms. they also leave their sentences incomplete. Deborah Cameron writes that Jesperson is caught between his fantasies, and these fantasies are captured by words like soft spoken, retiring, child women, and what is the other thing? And his prejudices. And what are those prejudices? They are suggested by his use of words like loquacious, bird brained women. These are words which Jesperson used. So, we can say that these words produce a kind of stereotype that is both old, and we can think about Shakespeare's comment that a low voice is an excellent thing in women, and yet contemporary. What Cameron calls folk linguistic assertions about women's speech include disfluency, unfinished sentences, statement couched as questions, tendency to be silent in mixed groups, and use of cooperative and supportive strategies in conversation. Her use of this particular term is very interesting. She is talking about folk linguistic tradition. Now, there are 4 different perspectives in this study. And what are these 4 different perspectives in this study? In discussing the relationship of gender and language, these approaches view this relationship in terms of deficit, dominance, difference, and social constructionist approach. Robin Lakoff's 1975 book, Robin Lakoff's 1975 book Language and Women's Place, which is based on American women's use of language, is one of the early works which talked about differences between men's and women's language. American women's use of language is marked by the following features, as Eckert and McConnell sum up the main points in Lakoff's study. First is tech questions. This election mess is terrible, isn't it? Rising intonation on declaratives. Use of hedges. Hedges, like for example, that is kind of sad. It is probably dinner time. Boosters or amplifiers. I am so glad you are here. Indirection, saying, well, I have got a dentist appointment then. Diminutives, panties, for example. Euphemisms, for example, avoiding profanities, using circumlocutions, like for example, like go to bathroom and not pee or piss. Conventional politeness is another point, especially forms that mark respect for the addressee. We can see that Lakoff's categories present women adopting a position of powerlessness, lack of authority, and tentativeness. Following her work, many studies appeared on the scene advocating need of assertiveness for women. Lakoff's work, it is labeled as an example of deficit model. It has been criticized for repeating some of the old stereotypes about women's speech. In some studies, it was suggested that powerlessness was not a gendered phenomenon, but was rather a result of one's access to actual power. Dale Spender's man-made language is an example of the dominance approach, which results from women's subordinate position in patriarchy. Women's socialization plays an important role in the approach which emphasizes difference. Deborah Tennant's distinction between men's report style and women's repo style is an example of this difference. In social constructionist theory, the role of society and culture is emphasized. Sexism in language is one separate topic almost, and similarly what is called gender neutral language, it is also an important topic which has become almost independent. So, the question is language inherently sexist or it can be put to sexist uses? The issue of sexism, not specific to any language, has been discussed in great detail. As a practice, sexism in language perpetuates patriarchal notions, placing women in a position of subordination, denying them agency and choice. These are very important words, agency, and let us just pause a little and think about this word agency. Agency means this particular choice, or whether women have the choice to make their decisions. they have the choice to say what they want to say? In other words, are they independent or they are dictated to by others? So, women's agency becomes a key term. Now, we can say that sexism can often appear in unsuspecting ways. Thus, in an everyday example like innocent women and children, women are, as Cameron explains, infantilized. They are considered helpless and powerless like children. Similarly, when the word mothering is imbued with positive meaning, it discriminates against non-mothers. In many commonly encountered sentences like a girl was raped, see the passive voice, or a woman was harassed, see the passive voice, the use of passive voice shifts the focus away from men, the active agents and the perpetrators of the crime. You can see, for example, this particular sentence which is in passive voice. Where do we use passive voice? We use passive voice where the agent is not important, where the doer is not important. And when do we use active voice? In active voice, doer is important, the agent is important. So, for example, this particular sentence, a girl was raped, a woman was raped, obviously there was a criminal, there was a person who committed that crime. So, that person's identity is hidden, that person appears invisible in this particular sentence. On the other hand, woman was raped. This particular sentence in a way conceals the identity of the doer. So, use of passive voice can be a kind of political decision sometimes. It possibly can have some kind of ideological connotations. And feminists have noted that more endearment terms are used to address women than men. Endearment terms, so for example, a term which displays one's affection or love. Words like love, dear, honey, pet and hen for women are much more common than for men. In the same way, more words associated with women's bodies are used to insult women than is the case with men. You think about all filthy abuses, and possibly those abuses are words which are also used for women's body parts. So, that is one example of misogyny. Muriel Schultz believes, as Cameron puts it, that many terms used to insult women first began their journey as unisex words. This is interesting. That means, originally that word was not an offensive word. Thus, harlot once meant simply a young person and tart meant innocent. It was only when these words were associated with women that they developed their negative connotations. Many masculine and feminine pairs developed negative connotations for the feminine term. Thus, in pairs like bachelor, spinster, courtier, courtesan, governor, governess or master, mistress, the feminine term carries negative connotations. See the word mistress, see the word courtesan. Feminist intervention in language has created greater awareness about replacing sexist uses of language with gender neutral terms, sometimes even rewriting the grammar of language and coining new words. Thus, Casey Miller and Kate Millett, the authors of Handbook of Non-Sexist Writing, emphasize practical steps with a new set of rules. There have been also many successful attempts at compiling feminist dictionaries. Usually lexicography is considered a job which is descriptive, but as Deborah Cameron discovered, entries in a dictionary reflect a prescriptive bias. Kramer and Paula Teschler compiled a feminist dictionary which includes use of quotations from the work of women writers. Thus, in their dictionary, the word home is defined as most women's place of work, but it also includes Betty Friedan's ironic description. And what is that? A comfortable concentration camp. Jane Mill's Women Words, this is another dictionary. It is modeled on Raymond Williams' famous Keywords, is a collection of essays on 300 odd words which relate to women. Thus, many words like wicked and effeminate which have changed meaning are part of this dictionary, as are words like tart and bitch, which define women as edible and animal like. Feminist scholars have tried to address the problem of sexism in language in different other ways too. They have resorted to a process called reclaiming, whereby a positive meaning is given to a word with negative meaning. This is also a practice in black writing, where some words earlier considered offensive are used to reclaim their meaning. Words like spinster and sluts are used with a positive meaning. Another strategy is to use offensive words in a descriptive manner, so that they lose their evaluative edge. This is interesting. We can just pause a little. You see, there are two kinds of words: words which are purely descriptive and words which are evaluative. Words which are evaluative, they suggest a kind of evaluation of the other person. So, for example, if you use an offensive word for somebody, or if you use a filthy abuse for somebody, in other words, you are also saying that this is my opinion about you. When the word dog is used as an offensive word, one is saying that this is my opinion of you. But when this particular word is used not as an evaluative word, but rather as a word which is simply descriptive, which is used in a matter of fact manner, what happens that its offensive edge, its offensive bite, its evaluative bite is taken away, and gradually that evaluative bite will disappear and the word will probably retain, or it will have a kind of descriptive meaning. Now, there are other strategies also. Vandalism on language and changing the etymology of words are other strategies. Works like Mary Daly's Gynecology, actually it comes from the word gynecology, commit a creative vandalism on language. See, the word gyn, it refers to woman, and ecology, it refers to environment, gynecology, but here it is gynecology. It commits a creative vandalism on language, often changing the spelling of words, rewriting them in a punning manner and playing on their obsolete meanings. Thus, therapist becomes the rapist, and haggard and spinster are used in their original sense. A very positive effect of feminist intervention in language has been the emergence of a gender neutral or gender inclusive language. One major example of sexism is the generic use of masculine gender in language. Thus, in many texts, the word man or the pronoun he is used as a generic category, speaking for all men and women. The alternative view is that sentences should be recast so that they do not discriminate against women. Thus, words like policeman and stewardess are replaced by police officer and flight attendant, chairman by chairperson or simply chair, mankind by humanity, spaceman by astronaut, forefathers by ancestors, and craftsman by artisan. The word actress is gradually becoming obsolete. Instead, the masculine actor is being used in a gender neutral manner. Feminists also find a problem with the pronoun system of English language. The problem is addressed either by using he or she or by using plural they as singular. We can pause here also. Say, for example, the word he. The word he is often used even for women, for everyone. So, this objection is very correct, that why should the word he, why should this pronoun he be used for women? And so, there is this solution that both these words he or she can be used in the same sentence. One may simply stay clear of the problem by rewriting a sentence, as Cameron suggests. The sentence pick up a baby when he cries can be rewritten always pick up a crying baby, or by using the plural form pick up babies when they cry. There has been a conscious effort on the part of many feminist writers to use what Cameron calls the visibility strategy or positive language, where all generics are feminine, like she and her. Just imagine a text where he is not used, where his is not used, rather where her and she These are the words which are used. The reason why she writes like this is to highlight women's presence in texts who have otherwise been deleted out of history. She is aware that, and we are talking about Cameron, that positive language is akin to positive discrimination. It is a stopgap measure, a necessary stage on the long historic journey toward liberation and justice. So, we can see that feminist intervention in language has really brought about some very important changes. And today many publishers also issue guidelines to writers that you must write your prose in a gender neutral manner. You must show greater sensitivity towards women. You should not use a generic he. In the same way, there has been a great change in the way literature is read today. And one very important result of feminist intervention in literature is that today when we talk about canon, there are a number of women writers who are taught in universities. There are a number of courses on women writers alone. And today we also have number of publication houses which publish books by women. Say for example, Kali for Women or Zaban. And there are many such publication houses where women's writing is the focus, women's writing is considered important, it is published, it is discussed, it is reviewed. And overall we can say that feminist intervention in literature and language has brought about really very drastic change, fundamental change, crucial change in the way we read literature and in the way we use language. It is a stopgap measure, a necessary stage on the long historic journey toward liberation and justice. So, we can see that feminist intervention in literature and language has really changed the way we read literature, changed the way we approach literature, changed the way we use language. As a result of feminist intervention, we see number of publication houses issuing guidelines to writers to use language in a sensitive manner, to show greater sensitivity towards women. And we also see number of publication houses which publish books by women writers. The visibility of women writers has increased. The use of language by even ordinary people has shown this sensitivity towards gender. Thank you.